Well, I'm a first-generation American, born in the Boston, Massachusetts in 1931. My mother's family had an interesting last name. It was Bix, B-I-X, and they were from what is now northeastern Ukraine, a town called, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, Chernihiv. Chernihiv, maybe you've heard of it before. It was the Chernigov gubernia. I think gubernia means province or something like that in Ukraine/Russia. And the family name, again, was Bix, B-I-X. I think they came to the United States, Boston area, lived in the West End of Boston before the revolutions. So I would say around 1914, somewhere around there, the family came and lived, and my mother's name was Ida Chaya Bix, and her married name was Fisher, F-I-S-H-E-R. And I think she was born around 1895, died in 1962. And her father was Zelig Bix, and her mother was Minnie, B-I-X, in Ukraine. My father was Irving Itzhak Fisher. And Fisher, it was Fisher, and he was from a place, I have his memoir here, in his own handwriting, Braslav. There are a lot of towns and cities with similar, Braslav. It was about maybe 100 miles from Kovno, Lithuania. I'm not sure it was Lithuania, may have been part of Russia like Ukraine. Certainly part of the Pale, we know that. So Itzhak Fisher was my father. His father was Mayor Wolf Fisher, and mother was Esther Fisher. And I had two brothers, now deceased, Mayor, Mike, and Berila, who was known as Barney Fisher. And I'm the last one standing. I'm Fagala, Florence Fisher Stahl.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad you brought all these specific place names. This will be excellent for us to look into.
Yes.
I'm wondering, that was a little bit about the geography and the timeline. Do you have any famous or infamous family stories about any of those folks that you'd like to share?
There's a poignant story I'd like to share among millions, and that's my father wrote his memoirs, and it was amazing. He wrote it a little after World War II. It was in the mid to late 50s. He started his memoirs, and I have them with me in both his handwriting, and then we printed it, but in his handwriting. We had it printed. And he talks about his childhood in Lithuania. And you know, as you know, it's very hard for first generations to learn anything about they didn't want to talk about it. And we know why. But my father talked about a beautiful childhood, and it's a little different. He talks about the countryside and living near a lake and going fishing. He has this beautiful memory. So that was a little exceptional that I had that balance of memory. Otherwise, it was silent, totally silent. I know so little about my mother's shtetl, except that it was awful. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm really excited for when we get to have a look at
Yes,
that.
and the poignant part of my father's memoir is that they were happy in this little village. They had a little house with an attached open barn where they had a horse and a cow. And I guess my grandfather, Mayor Wolf Fisher, sold animals, traded animals, went to the next shtetl, bought a young animal, brought it back and sold it, and so forth. So my father talks about this, and it sounds, and they went to shul together. My father, as a little boy, he talks about holding his father's hand. And another poignant part of his memoir, there was a fire in a nearby peach orchard. And my father remembers being carried on his father's shoulders, and his father reached up and picked a warm peach off a tree, a warm peach from the fire. It's all beautiful memories until we get to this one, which is so poignant. He talks about the family being happy, but they weren't making a living enough, so they had to move to the big city, and we all know what that's like. It's something that's repeated all the time. So where did they move? They moved to Kovno. Apparently, my grandmother, Esther Fisher, and by this time, one of their 4 children was already in New York or Boston in the golden USA. My grandmother went to Kovno to scope out a job for her husband, and she couldn't find an equivalent job to what he did in the village, which was trading young animals. This was a little different. She found him a job in a slaughterhouse. And he came to Kovno. And I don't think he was there very long, no longer than perhaps a month or 2, when he caught cholera. And if you look up when he caught it, you will know that it's one of those huge waves of cholera that started a little bit to their west in England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, all of Northern Europe, and you've heard of it before. Sometime in the mid to late 1800s, it's historic, and he catches cholera, and he dies. Shortly after moving to, it's so poignant. They wanted a new life, a good life. He gets caught up in the cholera, and he dies. And then his widow, with 3 children, they make their way to Latvia by rail. And it's all in his memoir. Train across Lithuania to Latvia, Latvia across the Baltic, do I have that right? To Hull, which is on the east side of England. You don't hear much about Hull. And then by train across the entire width of England to Liverpool, which we hear about, but they had to get from Kovno to Liverpool, and they did. And I have the name of the ship and all of that they got on. Yes, yes.
Wow. And do you know what year they arrived in that ship or around?
Again, it's before the revolution. So again, I'm putting it a year or 2. The revolution is generally, 1917? So again, it's somewhere in 1914, 15, 16. Perhaps it's actually in his memoirs, but it's in that range, yeah.
Wonderful. God.
And they didn't go to New York. They both disembarked in Boston. Yeah.
That sounds like an incredible memoir.
It is.
Are there any other stories from that you'd like to share? We'll transition a little into your own life soon.
Well, my father talks quite a bit about Liverpool. And once they got there, it was quite organized. There were barracks for the boys and barracks for the women. Have you heard this story before? You haven't? Oh my goodness. Then this will be you. This, when you read his memoir, which I brought with me, he describes Liverpool quite a bit. And he describes being in the hold of the ship quite vividly. And when he was brought off the ship, my father was about just bar mitzvahed. So I'm pegging him at around 13 and a half, not quite 14, when he makes this epic journey from his homeland, his birthplace. He's already in a big, strange city where he didn't grow up. And then they have to make their way from there to England. And he describes being in the ship. And he names the ship. It's all in his memoir. I'm sorry, I don't, but it's all in the memoir, the name of the ship. And it's quite, you can look it up. But he comes off the ship and he's sick. So when they disembark, he's taken straight to the hospital in Boston, some hospital in Boston as a little boy. And I think they served him, and perhaps you've heard this story before, but in the hospital, they served him a banana. Have you heard this story? He didn't know how to eat it. And so he takes a knife and a fork, and he tries to eat the banana, and the nurses and all the other patients laugh at him. And this was his first look at a banana. It's all quite poignant, and he writes beautifully in his second or third language. He writes in English. It's really a prize, a gift to have his memoir. Can I show it to you?
I'd love to see it.
All right. I'm going to show it to you in two ways. One way, he dates it December 15, 1945. This is in his handwriting. He's learned how to write English. He's learned how to write in cursive. And he writes, I have reached the half-century mark, knowing that lifespan is 70, so I will try to put on paper the fleeting glimpses of my life as far as my mind recollects. And he goes on in this fashion. And this, I won't read it because I have a printed version that I'm going to leave. I was born the second day of the Jewish month of, December. What's December? 10? What's December? 10?
It would depend.
Tevet?
Yeah.
Tevet. 1895, in a small town called Braslaw, Braslaw. I believe it is located on the border of Lithuania and Poland, and about 50 miles from the city of Dvinsk. So here he begins his tale, and it is fascinating. I'm very grateful. Wow. Very.
I'm wondering, before we transition away from the memoir, if you have any memories of him during the time he was writing it.
Yes, I do. I can picture him. We lived in a small they bought a home in Winthrop, Massachusetts. It's east of Boston, right on the Atlantic. I could hear the waves. It's a rocky shore east of Boston, in the Jewish section, although I didn't know I lived in the Jewish section. There was a Greek section, there was an Italian, and I lived in the Jewish enclave, but I didn't know that. But I'm sorry, what did you ask me about?
If you have any memories of him writing during the writing.
Yes, I do. He's sitting at his desk, and it was a desk that had a fold-out top to it, which came down and served as it's called a writing desk, I believe. It was a small desk with shelves, with drawers underneath, and it had this shelf that came down. And let's see, he says he begins in 1945, and I was born in 31, so I'm 10, 11, 12, about 13 or 14. And I can picture him writing at that desk after dinner, yes. And of course, we weren't curious as to what he was doing. You know, he just sat there. He didn't talk much about it. You know, we were, at 14, 13, you're wrapped up in your own life. And December of 1945, I'm not sure whether World War II was over yet. So I had one brother in the Navy and one brother in the Army. I'm much younger. I'm about 10, 13 years younger. 13 from one brother, 10 from another. So they may have even been, I know they weren't there when he was writing it, but yes, to answer your question, I do remember him writing it.
So we've just heard some wonderful stories about your father's memoirs, and we just started to hear a little bit about the neighborhood that you grew up in. I was hoping you could tell me a little bit more about that neighborhood. Who lived there? What did it look like?
Well, as did so many Jews, they worked in Boston. My mother and father met in a sweatshop in Boston, and they lived in the West End, which was a Jewish enclave. And I guess they had an opportunity, I don't know much of the details, to buy a house in Winthrop. They lived a little bit in Worcester. That's where I think their first child was born when they were living in Worcester. My father made a living as a clothing cutter. And this was before they used electric scissors. Have you ever seen a pair of scissors that they used? Oh, I wish I brought them to this interview. The scissors that he used are this long. They weigh, oh, I wish I had brought them. They weigh about, this scissors that my father used to cut through layers of cloth, the scissors itself must have weighed about at least 3 pounds. And he did that. He laid out cloth on a table, and then he laid out the pattern on top of the cloth. But you had to be very careful. I don't sew, but people who do will understand what I'm saying. You have to lay a pattern out very carefully so that it matches. And my father was in menswear, and the collar had to match the lapel, especially when you're dealing with plaids or stripes or very expensive camel hair or vicuna imported from Argentina. So you had to really be an artist, a real craftsman at your trade, not to waste or spoil any material that costs your boss money. So my father laid the cloth out and then the pattern. And then after a while, they got electricity and they plugged into a light or something, and he had an electric shears. But before then, it was a big, long shears, this long. I'm glad I kept them.
Wow.
So let's see what other stories. As you can see, very little from my mother's side. Why? Because nobody talked. So I don't know what it was like in Chernihiv, Ukraine. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I do have one memory from my mother. And of all things, it was about the mikveh. And she didn't like it. I as a little girl, I mean, we'll get to my upbringing in a moment. I'm trying to make sense of it because, again, nobody sat down and actually talked to me. I'm piecing it together. But I remember clearly my mother had a great distaste for the mikveh. And I got the impression that the reason for that was that it wasn't clean, which flies in the face of what we think of as a mikveh today, which is marvelous and sanitary. But maybe in the shtetl of the 1840s and 30s, when women went there after their menstrual cycle, maybe it wasn't. Maybe water was not that easy to carry. I don't know. Do you? Have you heard any stories?
About mikvahs?
About mikvahs in the shtetl, in the poor shtetl.
I would have to do some more research.
Yes, so I do that I do remember. And as much as I got a wisp of childhood happiness from my father, that is offset by the childhood sadness of my mother. That was different for them. Trying to think of anything else from my mother's side. Not at the moment.
There's plenty of time for stories to bubble up. I'm wondering, Winthrop, it's such an interesting place to end up.
Yes. Apparently, the immigrants could afford a home to buy real estate in Winthrop on the beach area. This was where the immigrants, so there must have been something about the real estate, which is so odd now, because now beachfront, waterfront, but it wasn't then. In the 1920s, it wasn't. This was, it was near a railroad. The railroad ran in back of my home. I was born in Boston, but they lived in Winthrop. I was brought my whole life in Winthrop. My whole life was in Winthrop. And maybe they could afford this property because it was, it was called Shirley Street in Winthrop. And the street ran parallel to the beach. But the beach was slightly up a paved street, and the street that ran right along the ocean front, I think, was called Ocean Avenue. But Shirley Street, where we lived, was downhill. So as a kid, I didn't realize there were many floods, because when the waves crashed over this was before there was a seawall. When the when the raging Atlantic off the Massachusetts shore, on the North Shore, when the waves crashed over, they ran downhill and into our home, into the basement. And of course the furnace went out because the furnace was coal. It was coal. We had to shoot, and I was too young to appreciate the hardship of my father having to start to get rid of the way. It must have been very hard, yeah. But the non-Jews, the Goyim, did not live there. They lived in Winthrop Center. And again, I wrote a poem, but I didn't bring it. It was about, we lived here and they lived there. One half Goy, the other Jew, and somehow we all knew. It was something like that. Oh, I didn't know to bring it, but anyway. Yes.
No, I mean, you've talked again and again about your coming to awareness about living in a more Jewish area.
Yes.
Was there a particular moment or series of experiences you can point to?
Well, I'm going to answer that question in a sort of a rolling way, because having reached the age of 93, my life has been a series of understanding, of greater and greater insight into my life as a kid with my parents, as a young married, the insights I have been so grateful for. So yes, it's been like a rolling, wonderful, sometimes painful insight. Oh, so that was so that was why that happened. And this insight into the real estate of Winthrop Beach, I had no insight, only as an adult, to answer your question, why Winthrop. But I spent my whole, when I was first married, it was from Winthrop. Everything was Winthrop until I got married in 1954.
Well, we've been talking so much about the neighborhood. I wonder if we can come specifically to your home. I have a question about it. Would you say that you grew up in a Jewish home? And if so, what about it felt Jewish?
That's such a complex question. It's not a complex question, but it's a complex answer. And again, looking back on it, was I brought up in a Jewish home? Yes. But what do you mean by Jewish? And I had nothing to compare it with. We definitely ate kosher. No treif whatsoever. But did we have fleischadik and milchadik? I don't think so. Did my mother light the candles? Was there a Shabbat? I don't have memory of that. And I think I would have remembered that. That would have been, any Jewish kid would have remembered that. I don't really remember that. And we kind of went to shul, but mainly around the holidays. Now, looking back and reading a little history, I think my mother and her family, my mother's whole family lived in Winthrop. But before I was born, there was some family squabble that was never explained to me. So I don't remember seeing my mother's family very often, even though they all lived just down the street. I just accepted it. So I think and perhaps you who have studied Yiddish and have studied this period know that in some shtetls throughout the Pale, there were Jews who were caught up in socialism, in communism, in the Bund, where being Jewish was not such a good thing, was not a... I don't know, I'm not that steeped in the history, but do you know where I'm going with this?
That their practice was political or communal in nature.
That maybe being outwardly Jewish, I don't know how Jewish my mother shtetl was in her home. I don't know, but as my parents, and again, by the time I was born, there was a 13-year-old boy and a 10-year-old boy. I know my mother bought kosher food. I remember going to the kosher butcher with her, where sometimes we would pick out a live chicken. She would pick out a live chicken. And she was a marvelous cook. I remember her making unparalleled, of course, as a kid. But I remember her grinding raw fish to make gefilte fish. I remember her making teglach, certainly Hommentaschen. Going back to teglach, I remember a big pot of boiling honey where she dropped the... So, yes, we had a Jewish home. But prayer and Shabbat, I think I went to Sunday school, sort of. I think they went to shul, sort of. My father would have been more observant. I think I sense that in him. He had a tallis in a zippered velvet bag, and he had his own prayer book. So I think he would have been, but he married a woman, his wife, who I don't remember doing Shabbat, with the Shabbat dinner and the prayer, no.
No, those food descriptions are making me so hungry. I'm wondering if there's any other foods that you remember eating.
Oh, I do. I remember, of course, the epitome of Jewish chicken soup, unparalleled. I remember my mother cooking on a wood stove, on a black stove where you lifted the lid up and put wood in it, sometimes coal. That was before she got a gas stove or an electric. I remember the unparalleled chicken soup. Of course, the matzah balls during Pesach. I remember my first taste of, I think I'm saying this right, what did they call the inside of a bone?
The marrow.
And what's the Yiddish word for it?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Something like that. I want to say mun, but mun is poppy seeds.
Poppy seed.
It begins with an M, the marrow. There's a Yiddish word for it. My first taste of the marrow. So, and my mother made cinnamon buns. She probably made, I'm sure she made challah. A magnificent cook and baker.
You mentioned Passover around the soup.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you have any other memories of Passover or any other holidays.
Well, yes. I remember fasting. Ah, yes, we fasted. We definitely fasted. Again, because I was so much younger than my brothers, and because World War II came along, so my brothers are out of the house. They're serving, one in the Army at Walter Reed Hospital, because he was a bacteriologist, and one in the Navy, in the thick of it, in the Pacific, on a battleship. We didn't know, so it's mostly me and my family, without my brothers, that I'm remembering. But if I can jump around to World War II, my brother Barney Barilla was a gunner's mate on a battleship in the Pacific, the SS Baltimore. And the Baltimore was attacked by the famous Japanese kamikaze pilots. But both brothers came back alive. As I say, one was always stateside at Walter Reed Hospital. He had I don't know at that point whether he had a PhD, but he went on and he got a PhD in bacteriology.
We've been talking a little bit about Winthrop and about your home and about your family. And I'm still curious. I feel there's more to talk about with your family. So I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what languages you heard in your home.
Mostly English. Both my parents spoke English. My mother could not really read or write English, but she spoke English. And again, in terms of insight, how that must have burned her self-esteem, because she was smart, she was a businesswoman, and we know that there was a school for immigrants in Boston. We know that. And we know that you weren't supposed to hire immigrants. We know that employers had to let them go to school. That was some kind of law. My father went and learned English. And apparently, because my mother's family needed the money, or she never quite went to that school, and so she went right to work in a sweatshop in Boston and either faked her certificate or she did not learn how to read and write. And I remember when I was in grammar school, how she wanted to learn how to read and write, and she couldn't somehow. Maybe, I don't know, she tried, and I think there was a tutor, but she never learned how to read and write. And that really came back to bite her, because how she wanted to drive. And you can't get a license if you can't read. And nevertheless, she was the businesswoman in the family to the best of her ability, but she was totally frustrated.
Can you tell me a little bit more about her professional life?
Her professional life?
In the sweatshop, her work.
I remember that she worked in a blouse factory. And my father must have been a cutter, although he worked in menswear for most of his life. It was men, suits and coats. As I said before, these fancy, expensive vicuna camel hair coats. But when she was married, she didn't work. But she nevertheless was a businesswoman, and by that I mean, in the 30s, I was born in 31, around 1935 or 36, as they were coming out of the Depression, I didn't know anything about it, but I'm telling you that in retrospect. They lived on Shirley Street in Winthrop, one street down from the beach. And Winthrop was a place where people came in the summertime from Dorchester, from Lynn, to rent rooms during the summer so they could go down to the beach and get the sun and the water. So in the summertime, my parents rented rooms where we lived, and the summer people came. And that's what we call them, the summer people. They were Jews. They were Jews from Roxbury, from Dorchester, from Lynn. Maybe some of them went to Revere Beach, some of them other beaches, but some came to Winthrop. And the money that they got from the summer people paid the taxes on the house. I remember that. But here's where I get to my mother was the businesswoman. My father was more of a scholar, and he would have been had he not been a clothing cutter. You can tell by his writing that's what he wanted to do. Couldn't make a living doing that. Certainly not for a Jewish immigrant, unless you're, Shalom Aleichem or something. But anyway, my mother got it in her mind that instead of living in a two-family house, she was going to knock out the first floor and build stores so they could be landlords. And my father, this is all in retrospect. My father didn't want that. He wanted a quiet home, My mother prevailed, as she did in everything. And in 1935-36, I remember looking at the gutted, our home we lived upstairs and it was like on stilts. And they took out the first floor and built 3 stores and rented 3 stores on Shirley Street where there was commerce.
And what kind of professions were people doing in these stores?
Well, I think they rented it, I remember, to a butcher. I think maybe there was let's see, I remember the butcher. I think there may have been a drugstore. This was over many decades, so later on there was a coin-operated wash, but that was in the 50s, and that was in the 50s. But yeah, they rented the stores.
Amazing.
But living on top of stores changed the whole gestalt of yes, yeah.
I know later we're going to be speaking some about your own political life and on all the political work you have been doing. And I'm wondering if there was any particular political atmosphere you remember in your home or in your neighborhood from your childhood.
I remember coming home from school and my mother was crying and I didn't know why, and she said, "The president died." And that was that was FDR. I didn't know. I was just a kid, 7, 8, 9 years old. And everybody was crying. Everybody was crying. And I remember saying, they're crying because a president died. And I tried to put 2 and 2 together, but I do have that memory. Yeah.
And did you have any particular publications, newspapers, or magazines that you remember from around the home?
Coming to my home?
Yes.
No.
Amazing. And I know through your daughter, Eileen, Jewish music will become a really important part of your story later. I'm wondering if you have any memories of Jewish music during this time.
Not really, but I can remember a few Yiddish songs that were the favorite of my parents, but nobody played an instrument. So to have a daughter who's wonderful clarinetist and of all milieus to be, it's an amazing story. But I remember some Yiddish songs from my home. I'm going to sing little snippets for you.
Please.
Wie hast du gewinn, wenn de Geld is gewinn, wenn de Leben is gewinn? Also sweet.
Süß.
What's the word for sweet?
Süß.
Süß. I remember that. And I remember Tumbalalaika. Steht a Buche und Tracht, wem zu nehmen ein bei Nacht. I remember that. And my father sang a song that I don't think was a Yiddish song. It might have been a song from the Depression. I'm trying to think, something about coming home and never seeing his children because he's always working. It was about New York that didn't have a heart. If I remember it, I'll try to sing it. But he used to sing that. So those are the songs that come to mind.
It's so great to hear you sing. Thank you for sharing that. You touched a little bit on your time in grammar school. I'm wondering if you could tell me more generally about your education, both generally and if there's any particulars you'd like to mention.
It's really interesting to answer that question as a 93-year-old woman, because again, I'm looking back on it with a perspective and an insight, and I want to tell you that when I was in grammar school in the early 30s, we did a pageant, and it was about the South. And I remember that we split up, the class split up into some played the North, some played the South. And I remember singing, I was born in the land of cotton, and the good memories there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And I remember now, looking back as an adult, how laundered the history was. And this was way before the Black movement, before Black Lives Matter. And we were in the Northeast. And it was totally laundered. So yeah, I do, but you know, I'm coming at that from a long perspective. I remember being a good student, loving school. But I think it might have been in junior high, coming home on the school bus, where I heard my first anti-Semitic remark. And that was some kid on the bus, something about being a dirty Jew. And, oh my goodness, that really hurt. But I must have known a little bit about anti-Semitism because I remember saying, and I wouldn't have done this at the moment, because I remember turning to him and saying, what, are you jealous? As my best defense. So I can't remember, but I must have heard it. And that's when I probably became aware that all the Goyim, all the non-Jews, didn't live where I lived. That took a long time to dawn on me, because although in grammar school we weren't all necessarily Jewish, but I don't know, I was too young to ponder such things. Yeah.
Did you have any friends or connections or memories of going over to visit non-Jewish folks?
Very little. Very little. We were quite insular. Across the street from us, on Shirley Street, was an Italian family. And we were friendly with them, but I played mostly with Jewish girls. But I clearly remember being invited over and going into that Italian home as a young girl. And I cannot tell you how exotic the smell was. So foreign. Whatever spice I was smelling was strange to me and frightening and displeasing. And I wanted to get out of there. I felt alien. Just walking in to a home that wasn't Jewish, that had the scent of a different cuisine, was alien and frightening to me. I do remember that.
Wow, yeah, smell is such a powerful
So powerful.
memory. I wonder, do you think your home growing up had a particular smell?
Probably
or a set of
did.
smells?
But not to me. Probably did. Of course it did. The schmaltz and the onion, of course it did. Yeah, yeah.
Is there any more you'd like to share about your education before we move forward a little bit in time?
Well, I remember my friends and the slow integration when you move from the neighborhood grammar school. Again, we had some that was predominantly Jewish kids, not totally, to junior high and then high school. There you got the mixture. I always knew I was a Jew. I don't know how Jewish kids feel now. Maybe they still feel that way. I don't know. But I in the 30s and 40s, I certainly did, yeah. And of course, by that time, we started to hear about Hitler. Yeah. I graduated high school in 48. So the Holocaust was in full, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in hearing more about your memories from 39, 41, Pearl Harbor, U.S. entering the war.
Oh, I remember Pearl Harbor. Oh, I remember that clearly. Again, I remember it as something, I don't know if it was, history will tell us whether it was on a Sunday or whether I, again, heard from it when I got home from school. But I remember hearing about it. And I remember that after Pearl Harbor, one brother went in the Army and one brother went in the Navy. Oh, the one in the Navy was in harm's way. Oh. And I remember my father being so proud that he was named a neighborhood air raid warden. In World War II, we had designated air raid wardens that made sure that the blinds were down, and in case we heard the air raid wardens, my father didn't share too much with me, and again, I was a kid. I guess he went through instructions of what to do if there was an air raid, and he was the warden, and how proud he was of that, of being that. I don't know how big his territory was, but I think there were times when we had to pull down the shades. And I certainly remember World War II ration books, and I have a sample of one with me.
Would you like to take it out now?
Okay. All right, this is a photo of my mother's side of the family. This was taken in the United States. So they're here. I don't have, they're here in the USA, maybe a couple of years. This woman is my mother. This is her mother. This is my mother's brother, my mother's father, holding a son. This is one of my mother's sisters. And this is a married sister, and she's married to this man. And I think this is all while they're living in Winthrop. This is the Bix family, B-I-X, living in Winthrop, Massachusetts. They are all there within walking distance of one another.
Wow. And do you know the names of some of the folks?
Yes. My mother is Chaya. Her mother is Minnie. His name, he must be Yankel, because in English his name was Jimmy, and I think Jimmy is Yankel. This is Zelig, the patriarch. This is Katie, maybe Katya? This is Katie's son. No, this is Katie. Here's another sister. This is Broncy. I don't know. I think her name was Broncy. And this is her husband. I forget his name. And this is their child, Mayor. So there you have it, the Bix family.
Thank you. And I am really curious about that ration book as well. I know the folder's a little...
I'll get the ration book. This is a World War II ration book that everybody in the United States had, rich or poor, didn't matter. You had to have one of these books, I think, to get meat, milk, cheese, produce.
Oh, it looks like the back is... Oh, here, you want to hold it up for the camera?
I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to hold it up. United States of America, Office of Price Administration, War Ration Book 4. Read before signing. In accepting this book, I recognize that it remains the property of the United States government. I will use it only in the manner and for the purposes authorized by the Office of Price Administration. This is a World War II food ration book, because the food, everything went first and foremost to our armed forces around the world. And on the back it says, never buy ration goods without ration stamps. Never pay more than the legal price. So what do they mean by ration stamps? You had to use one of these stamps to get, you tore one out. The little stamps, you tore one out when you wanted to buy something that was rationed because of World War II. And I remember my mother saving schmaltz. You had to save fat. And if you did, they would pay for it. The schmaltz person would come around and pay for it. They used it for munitions or something. Yes. World War II ration book.
Wow. Thank you. So we've been hearing a little bit about your wartime experiences. I'm wondering where you got most of your news from.
Most of the news?
Were you listening to the radio, newspapers?
Radio.
Radio.
It was radio. Yes. It was radio that they heard about the bombing in Pearl Harbor. It was radio. Again, my mother couldn't read it. I don't remember maybe once in a while. Oh, I think maybe a Jewish newspaper. Maybe a Jewish newspaper, yeah.
We've been talking so much about your Jewish identity, and I'm also really curious about your experiences being a young girl going through this education system, living in Winthrop. Would you talk a little bit about gender and your experiences growing up?
Again, when you're in the vortex, you're not looking at the vortex, you're in it. And of course, I mean, I did everything that was expected of a young Jewish girl. I remember graduating high school, and I wanted to go to college. And my father said, all right. My mother said, there's no reason for you to go to college, none. You're going to get married, you're going to have a husband. And I really had to fight my way to go to college. And I did get a small scholarship, and I commuted. I commuted by, I don't know whether the train was still running, or by that time we had a bus to East Boston. I commuted from Winthrop to Boston. By the way, we lived near a rail station, and it was a very famous, it was called a narrow gauge railway. The gauge of the, I didn't know that then, but I do now. There were a few systems in the United States that had narrower gauges that served, and Winthrop was one of them, out of Boston. So we lived, our home on Shirley Street with the 3 stores was next to a railroad station. Playsted. The station was called Playsted, Playstead. Winthrop Beach, Playsted Station.
And do you remember how much tickets cost to get around when you were a kid?
I don't remember, but it couldn't have been much if I went to Boston every day to go to Boston University. I started out going to BU in it would have been the fall of 1948, and there was no complex on Commonwealth Avenue. They had a few scattered buildings. I went to school in rented space behind the Boston Public Library. I forget what street that's on. I think BU still has some real estate there. I went to the School of General Studies, GCS. I went from 48 to 50. Then from 50 to 52, I worked so I could go back. And then I went to COM, College of Communications, and graduated in 54.
Amazing.
And still not on, was I on Commonwealth Avenue then? I don't think so.
Before we transition fully into your professional life, which I'm really excited to talk about, I'm just wondering if we could take one more minute to reflect on your childhood. I'm wondering, as you're looking back, as you've talked so eloquently about your reflection from this vantage point, I'm wondering what values or practices you think your parents were trying to pass on to you.
That's a very good question, because it kind of knits things together. Because even though I can't say I remember Shabbos and a lot of the Jewish traditions, I remember being instilled in me to be proud that I am a Jew. That I remember. Now, was that in self-defense of some kind? Probably, some of it. But I remember that feeling, pride. It's not exactly parable, but it's understandable when you are like Black pride, like Muslim pride, like any pride, when you're not the predominant. It's the same psychological shoring up that people do, whether you're Jew, Black, whatever the underling is. So yeah, I can really relate to that. Yeah. Yes.
Any other values or ways of being in the world that you can think of?
You know, I'm going to have to come back to that pride because, and I'm going to go back to the Muslim and black and whatever the lesser is, because there must be a name for it. Because with the pride is always a mixture of inferiority. It's a very interesting psychological mixture. Yeah. 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 That was with me throughout my childhood.
Thank you for reflecting. I'm so curious now. We'll transition a little bit. You've been talking some about, you mentioned the Great Depression and growing up in the Great Depression and the outbreak of World War II. I'm wondering if there are any other major historical events that you'd like to share memories of.
Yes, there is one. In the medical field, we didn't have penicillin, which is so routine now we don't even think about it. We did not have penicillin. And I, as a child, had a very serious mastoid operation close to the brain. I had such a deep ear infection that A, I could die, or B, I could be deaf. And that operation took place only, I don't know what medicines they had then. We had sulfur, but it was pre-penicillin. And I do remember being in the hospital and being operated on. I guess I was about 6 or 7, something like that. So yes, that's another memory, a historic moment.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. It didn't cross my mind that would be the case. So I appreciate that. I'm wondering, we're moving more generally. We're going to talk soon about your professions, but I'm curious if there was any, this is more of a reflection, pieces of art, books, or music that have particular importance to you or have particular resonance.
Yes, two things come to mind when you say music or art. My family was not into music or art, just the songs that I heard. But were they musical? Were they literary art? No. But I remember the first piece of classical music I heard. I think it might have been on the radio. Otherwise, I didn't hear classical music. And I think it was a waltz of some kind, maybe the Blue Danube or some kind of Viennese waltz. And I loved it. I just loved it. And I remember the first piece of art that I saw was in one of my girlfriend's homes. My girlfriend, playmate, her name was Marilyn Kind, K-I-N-D. Have you run across that name as a Jewish? Maybe their name was Kinder, but it was Kind, K-I-N-D, Marilyn Kind. She did come from a more intellectual family. And I remember on her wall was Picasso's Guernica that I realized later in life, that's what I saw on Marilyn Kind's wall. It was the Guernica.
How did it make you feel when you saw
it? I remember looking at it and in wonderment. And now, of course, I love art, I love music, and I've seen art and seen music all over the world in my travels.
Well, that's as good a segue as any. You mentioned you graduated from BU, the communications school, in 1954. Is that?
I'm the class of 54.
Congratulations.
I still get BU letters and magazine. Yep.
And could you tell me a little bit about what happened next? Where did you live and where did your professional life develop from there?
I graduated in May of 54 and got married in June of 54. And I moved from Winthrop to Allston, which is a small suburb of Boston. And I lived there for a while, and I don't think I worked at that time. And my husband at that time was working as a technical assistant at MIT. And at that time, in 1954, the West Coast was really heating up with people like, what's the name of that that guy that opened the aircraft? Begins with an H. A guy opened a big plane factory on the West Coast. You would recognize his name. Very famous. It slips me at the moment. But they were sending scouts from the West Coast to the East Coast to find. My first husband wasn't an engineering graduate, but he was an engineering assistant, and his name was Arnold Clayman, Klayman. Maybe in the old country it was Kleineman. I don't know. Don't know much about his family. And they hired him on the East Coast and paid our way to drive to the West Coast to work at that plane factory. It was H.H., a famous plane manufacturer in the 50s. He went out with stars, with movie stars. Maybe it'll come to me, but it's easily found. If we had a book here, we would find it. And it was on the West Coast that I went to work, and I looked for a job, and I got a job at 20th Century Fox because I had a degree from Boston University in communications, and to them that was golden. What did I get a job as? A secretary. But it was wonderful. I worked on the lot of 20th Century. I worked in West Hollywood at 20th Century Fox, and on my lunch break, I would walk the back lot of 20th Century Fox, and I would walk from Thailand to Germany to South America to England. I walked along that entire length of fake movie sets. I saw them. And at lunchtime, every now and then, I would have lunch with Rita Moreno, who was exactly my age, and we were friends, and we'd have lunch in the cafeteria with Rita Moreno and a young British actress who is still alive. I can't think of her name right now. She's still, yes, at 20th. And while I was at 20th Century Fox, they loaned me out to Desilu as a secretary. I worked for the writer. I went with the writer. I was the writer's secretary. And the writer's name was Helen Deutsch. And she wrote National Velvet. And so I came with her to Desilu Studios. And that's where I met Lucille Ball. And I didn't know, she was without makeup. I didn't know who she was. One day I looked up from my desk, and this sweet red-headed woman wanted to know if she could have an appointment to see Helen Deutsch. And I didn't know it was Lucille Ball, but it was.
Wow. What other celebrity memories do you have? Those are some really incredible people to have had lunch with and to have chatted with.
Well, there must have been other stars, male and female, that I didn't know. And, we're going back. I was 26. No, I was 23. I was 23 at the time. And so maybe Marlon Brando would have been back then at that time, too. I don't know. Whoever worked for 20th Century Fox. I remember working at 20th on a movie called, I think it was called The Longest Day. And I think it was about the invasion on the beaches of Normandy. I worked for some of the writers of that, or a director or a producer. And yes, I worked at 20th Century Fox.
Wow. Any other memories from 20th Century Fox that you like to share?
Well, I had to punch a time clock. I remember doing that. I remember they were very kind to me. I remember living, I lived in West Hollywood. Howard Hughes. My first husband worked for Howard Hughes. That's who he worked. That's who hired him on the East Coast and paid our way to work in the startup of Howard Hughes aircraft industry. Howard Hughes. And I remember we lived in an apartment right near the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. And I remember, I don't know whether you, but there was a famous statue of like she looked like Marilyn. This was before Marilyn Monroe. And it was a statue that went round and round on Sunset Boulevard. And I could see that from where we lived. It was real Hollywood, yeah.
When you were there, did you have any Jewish experiences or experiences of Jewish community?
I don't think so. But my first husband, Arnold Clayman, had a relative who was already living in Hollywood. And he was famous for, I think he was one of the writers of The Beer Barrel Polka. And maybe I'll remember his name, because he was Jewish. And no, I don't remember going to synagogue or anything like that. No.
Wow. So how long were you at 20th Century Fox, and what came next for you?
Well, let's see. That would have been around 54, 55. And around that time, my first child, John, was born in 57 in Canoga Park, California. So a couple of years, I became pregnant, maybe in 50. John was born in March of 57, so I became pregnant in the fall of 56. So we moved, we bought a home in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley. And my first husband, although he worked in radar, but he was a veteran of sorts. So at that time, you could afford a house, especially if you were a veteran. It was a tract home in the San Fernando Valley. There were thousands of homes. It was so it was a little one-level bungalow. So I moved to Canoga Park, and that's when I left. I had left 20th Century Fox, but I got another job after Jonathan was born. When he was about a year and a half. No, he was a little older. I was divorced, and I got a job. You have all heard of TRW? Thompson Ramo Woolrich? Well, it started out as Ramo Woolrich in the Valley. I got a job in their public relations department. Again, it's that BU communicate, that helped me throughout. But I was a secretary, but I got a job there. And I worked there until I came back east to take care of my mother, who was dying of leukemia.
We'll transition into the time back east in just a minute. I'm just personally curious, in your secretarial work, what were you typing on? What was the setup?
Well, I think it was an electric typewriter. I think we had transitioned from the pushing down keys to, I think by that time I was on an electric typewriter. And that was a time when we used whiteout and we used carbon paper. So making a mistake was a really big deal. You couldn't go and just erase the letter like I do now on Wordsmith or whatever it's called. Yeah, an electric typewriter.
So you were just saying Lucy and Desi and the television.
Mm-hmm. I remember the movie industry was very afraid of television at that time. They didn't know if they would be totally displaced by another cultural medium. So, but I worked at both. At 20th, they were making films, and then Desilu Studios, which was the newest thing in television. Yeah, I just want to say again how very human and lovely Lucille Ball, and I forget where I was. I worked for a while in Helen Deutsch's home. Either she wasn't feeling well, or instead of going to Desilu Studios, I went to her home in Hollywood. She probably lived on Hollywood Boulevard, a beautiful mansion. She was already a well-known writer. And I remember I poured her a drink every afternoon at 4 o'clock. And I remember her home. And she was kind to me, a bit frightening.
I'm curious, in your time in the 50s and in this industry, if there were any ways which you were aware of blacklisting or communism, or how that interplayed with your life and your time there.
I can't remember an instance in the industry, or no. Although when I moved to a tract home in the San Fernando Valley, I don't remember if there were any non-whites there. I don't remember.
Thank you. And you were just saying a moment ago that you ended up divorcing and moving back east. Mm-hmm. What happened back east? What did your life look like?
Well, that was rather grim.
If you'd like to share.
I arrived in the fall of 1961, and my mother was deathly ill. And it was I had a little boy with me at that time. I do remember going cross country, packing up and moving from Canoga Park, and putting it on a moving van and not seeing it again, and having it in storage and all that. And I traveled by train cross country. I didn't fly. I went by train from Los Angeles to Boston. And I remember being in a little room with my little boy and mostly eating and staying in that room 24 hours a day. I think it took about 3 days to cross country in the train. And I remember the train stopping at exotic places in New Mexico and Texas and so forth. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Please.
So I came back to Winthrop, where I had left. And there I was, back again, where I didn't want to be. But I'm the only girl, and I was divorced, and my brothers are older and married, and it just fell on me, and I may be good at other things, but I'm not a very good or knowledgeable, taking care of a very sick person. So it was awful. It was just awful.
Yeah. And in your time in how long were you in Winthrop in that stretch? Did you stay there for a long time, or was it?
Back in Winthrop? Mm-hmm. Well, I came back in the fall of '61, and my mother died in June of '62. And I married my second husband in August of '62.
Wow.
And went to Connecticut.
And in Connecticut, you ended up in Avon right away, or?
In a neighboring town of Simsbury. Mm-hmm. And I didn't work, but I became very interested in town affairs, and I was elected president of the Simsbury Junior Women's Club.
Wow. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I must have joined, it's kind of a blurry time in my life, but I must have joined the Simsbury Junior Women's Club. Now that I think about it, a very white, probably very Republican thing, and I joined, and after a year or so, I became president of the Simsbury Junior Women's Club. And then I married in '62, and Eileen was born in '65, and then I moved from Simsbury to Avon, Connecticut, where I stayed for 40 years. And that's where Eileen went to school and started playing klezmer music with the wholesale klezmer band and so forth. But I was divorced in '74 or '75. And after that, I remember that I bought a home in Avon in my own name. The bank trusted me, gave me a mortgage. That was something. I bought it in '76. To have a woman own a home, it was amazing. I remember the bank, even though I was still working as a secretary somewhere, they took a chance on me.
Wow. I'm just picturing this really clearly. The '70s were such a potent time, and I'm wondering what your experiences of women's liberation or political consciousness were.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Well, all right. So in 1976, I bought, but before then, I guess I had joined the Democrat Town Committee of Avon. And it's the town committee that chooses, I think this is true throughout the country, whether it's Republican or Democrat, they choose candidates for local office. And in 1971, in Avon, Connecticut, I hadn't really lived there that long. They were choosing candidates to run for town council. Only at that time, it was called the Board of Selectmen. And I remember going to a Democrat town committee meeting, and they needed to come up with more candidates to run for Board of Selectmen. And I said, I'll run. They needed a fourth, anybody, any warm body, anybody would do. And I said, all right, put my name down. I was the first woman, and I think they must have known I was Jewish. I didn't say anything one way or another, nobody, but I think they knew I was Jewish. Stahl can be like my maiden name of Fisher. It is not necessarily, but I think they knew I was Jewish. So I was Jewish and I was a woman. And they put me on the slate. And I won. And I won for only one reason. Because Avon at that time, until very recently, was a solidly Republican town. I ran because all the women voted for me. Whether they were Republican or Democrat, it didn't matter. And I remember I had a campaign manager. I remember going to the landfill and giving out paper flowers at the landfill. And yeah, and I won. And I ran for office again. It was a 2-year term, and I won again. And then I was appointed to various things, and I ran and lost. I ran for the Board of Finance and lost, but I had already served I served on the Board of Finance. And then I was appointed to the Water Pollution Control Authority of Avon, and I became its chairman, woman. So I had quite, and that was also the time of Gloria Steinem. And I joined the women's movement, the women's, was it not liberation, and I went to their conventions.
What do you remember from those?
Yeah, and I think I met, it was Gloria Steinem, and do you know some of the other?
Let's see.
Betty Friedan.
Oh yeah, the feminine
Betty
mystique.
Friedan, Gloria Steinem. And there were local organizations of now, the National Organization of Women, NOW. I went to their conventions. And even knowing all that, the Republican women voted for me. Oh, they took a big chance on me.
Wow.
And then I went on to serve on Avon's Chamber of Commerce, and I opened my own business in Avon. I opened a resume business that Avon Resume. I was a resume writer. That's where BU and all the communications and everything kind of funneled into knowing how to listen and what to question and all that sort of thing.
Wow. And just to bring us to the present day, I'm wondering, can you give us a snapshot of your life right now?
Well, my life right now, well, when I was about 86, I closed up Avon Resume. It was still going in Avon. And I closed up shop, sold my home in Avon, and moved to Greenfield, Massachusetts to be near my daughter, Eileen Stahl. And with her help, and continuing with her help, she found me a place literally around the corner from where she lives. After we looked at many, many places and had despaired at finding, she found this place. And I will have been there 7 years next month.
Shkoyach. Tu. That is wonderful. Thank you. You know, we've mentioned Eileen a little bit, and you talked a little bit about her career as a klezmer clarinetist. I'm wondering how or if that has changed the way you interact with Jewish culture or your Jewish identity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Eileen will tell you, she didn't grow up in a particularly Jewish home. In fact, in some respects, it was, well, I don't know if anti-Jewish is too strong, but it was non-Jewish. I remember taking Eileen to clarinet lessons before, and I remember when she went to Hampshire, and she heard klezmer music for the first time, and subsequently joined the wholesale and so forth and so on. That's her story. But yeah, there's something, even though I've described my home to you as a child, there was something familiar about it. Wasn't all that foreign to me, which makes you wonder, if there's a sort of a genetic imprint that we don't, that's not in that double helix, or that is in that double helix. I think genetics are fascinating, and I'm not sure we know everything there is to know about genes. The obvious ones of hair color and eye color and height, but I'm wondering if there are some in there that are yet to be discovered.
Well, I look forward to finding out. And I know we talked a little bit about languages that you grew up with and your father's memoirs. Just because we're at the Yiddish Book Center, I'm curious about how you feel like your connection to Yiddish, or Yiddishkeit maybe more broadly, fits into your sense of Jewish identity today.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a good segue of talking about unknown. Yeah, I feel very connected. And where does Eileen get this from? She's a generation removed of non-Jewishness, of really, I don't know, but it's there. There. And I'm wondering if other ethnicities feel that way too. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did. If you had a Hindu kid or a 93-year-old Muslim woman who had that same kind of non-particularly Muslim, but some things spoke to them. I'm not sure it's only Jewish. I don't know, but for the moment, yes, there is a Yiddishkeit. Maybe it's from reading and it's absorbed that way. Maybe it's more mysterious than that. I don't have an answer.
Thank you. Well, we'll transition now a little bit as we're nearing the latter half of our interview. And thank you so much for your stamina and your storytelling this whole time. It's been so fabulous.
Thank you.
At the beginning we spoke about you being 93 years old and having all this time to reflect and really tumble your life over again and again. And you've shared so many wonderful things. I'm wondering, this is a more broad question, but if you could share a bit about how you feel that Jewish identity has changed over the last 90 years, if and how.
Well, it's hard to speak about Jewish identity in a universal way because we all know it's different from person to person. But this particular time is not only have I lived long enough to, and I'm not, everyone believes that and should, that their time on earth is unique. So, yes, of course, but layered over that uniqueness of my time span is an acknowledged uniqueness in terms of the planet, of artificial intelligence. I'm sure that people who live when automobiles felt that way, but we all know that in the long look back, this really is a unique time on the planet Earth. So I'm in it. And I really think it's a unique time for Jews as well that I'm in. And that's a chutzpahdik thing to say because of our long history. So how can this 93-year-old Jew say, I lived in a unique... So maybe that's a little much, because, I mean, certainly the burning of the Second Temple by the Romans was unique, and the diaspora and all that. But I lived as an American Jew through the Holocaust in America, but still, I lived while that was happening, and I can attest to the fact that Jews didn't hear about it in the United States. Even the Jews who went to shul didn't hear about it. It was unforgivable. But anyway, so I lived through the Holocaust. I lived through the end of World War II and the rise of the middle class. I'm part of that middle class. And I'm telling you, we were able to buy a home. It made all the difference. Even though divorced and split, but whatever, it made a difference. And now, in my 93rd year, oh, by the way, I also live through the reestablishment of the State of Israel in 47, the recognition by Truman and the United Nations. That's fantastic to live through all those things. So I lived through the establishment of a Jewish nation among nations. And now, it isn't that I haven't lived through anti-Semitism, I have all my life. And now there's a unique form of very layered anti-Semitism. I don't see the whole Jewish world through that at all, but it's a very complicated, layered anti-Semitism that is unique to this period because Israel exists, and also because of communications, the ease of communications, of spreading and stuff. And I am a beneficiary, and I've always been interested in human community. I mean, I graduated it's always been like so I'm fascinated by the way communications are used in the most fantastic ways that shape human destiny. We are AI, Snapchat, we're in it. We're in it, and it's so layered and complicated. And the ease of communicating fact and fiction are amazing. And yeah, and I could go on and on about the richness of my life. It's been quite a 93-year ride, let me tell you.
At this point, I feel we've covered so many topics and we're nearing the end of our recorded time. I'm wondering if there's anything that you haven't had a chance to talk about yet that you'd like to share.
Well, of course. I mean, there's been marriages and births and family and death, but I think I want to come back to the greatest gift of all that I have been fortunate, and that is the gift, not only the gift of look back, but I hope that, but the gift of this kind of a flash of insight. I don't know that necessarily happens with age. I don't know, but I've had some wonderful moments where it's like an opening, a flowering of understanding, and I'm very grateful for that, to be able to see a situation that may be personal to me, but maybe even worldwide, where, yeah, I kind of get it. It's a wonderful feeling.
That sounds beautiful, and I look forward and hope it will happen for me someday. And that brings me to my last question. You're 93, and you've just described the most vivacious life that I've heard of in a long time. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for future generations on this planet that you were talking about, in this unique moment in this world that we live in.
I don't know if I'm wise enough to give advice. Nothing that hasn't already been, try to think critically. Just try to gather as much knowledge as you can about something. Don't succumb if you can. See, the thing is, you have to be self-aware to know that you don't have knowledge in the first place. So it's a tricky interplay. But don't be quick to pass judgment. Don't be quick. Make sure that what you say, that just doesn't roll off your tongue. I don't know how. Try to read. Try to be knowledgeable, because being quick and being lazy in your thinking is so easy. It's such a rush to pronounce something, to be on this side or that side. It feels good, but beware that it isn't a product of lazy background, lazy thinking. If you've read and if you've educated yourself on all sides of an issue, then speak. So I don't know, that would be the sum total, I think, of what I want to impart.
Wow. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if there's any other documents you'd like to show the camera or photographs before we do the formal concluding language.
Well, maybe something from one of my elections?
Please, yeah.
All right. If you could take this.
Of course.
And this.
Let's see.
And maybe I'll show you something from Vote for Flo Stahl.
Please.
All right, let's see if I can find one of those. Oh, how about this one? I'm going to hold this one up. There am I running with the guys. Got it? Vote Democratic. And there are 3 guys and me. No one thought I would win, but I did. And then I ran again. So that's one of the things. For a responsive town government, vote Democratic. And here is a letter from Ella Grasso. Do you remember Ella Grasso? She was the governor of Connecticut. Dear Florence, my good wishes to you in your victory. Do you remember Gloria Schaefer? She was the Secretary of State. Dear Ms. Stahl, congratulations on your recent election. And here's one from Kevin Sullivan, I don't know, he was in government somewhere. So yeah, it was fun. Wow. It was fun being in government in Avon. Select woman decides not to enter election. That's when I probably ran for another board. And here's Hartford women, and I'm among Hartford women. Here's me at here's Avon resume. Oh, I could go on and on. Anyway, it's been a good journey.
Personally, a profound experience, and I'm so grateful to have heard what of your story that you've shared today. And I know there's so much more, and I look forward to hearing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Right back at you. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.